I want to share with you a video about my struggles to understand faith and the expectations I have that may be misplaced. In this journey, I learned some pretty hard things, like maybe I'm lukewarm, that my definition of faith is flawed, and that all of the answers that I've been looking for were right in front of me all along. And these are hard things to learn. To set the stage, sometimes I feel like I'm traveling 180 degrees away from where God is directing me to go. Kind of like the story of Jonah, but unlike Jonah, I'm not intentionally doing this. And even though I am going through storms like Jonah did, I've not yet been swallowed by a fish to set me straight. Instead, for me, I hear nothing, no feedback, except that many of the things I step out in faith to do, especially the big risky things, don't seem to work out. So this is the question that I've been asking, that why when I step out in faith, it doesn't work out. So I've been using this tool that I've been building, which is kind of like a Google Maps for the Bible, to help me understand what the word says about this question. So with this tool, I can type in this question, why when I step out in faith, does it not work out? And then the tool finds me all the relevant scriptures that speak about this question, and it maps it all out for me to study. Now, in hindsight, I probably should have stopped here and just meditated on these scriptures. However, just like most things in life, it's not the answer that actually teaches me. No, that would be too easy. Unfortunately, it's the uncomfortable journey that I take to get to these answers, and as they are burnt into my soul, that eventually teaches me. So in this video, I want to show you this journey, which eventually does end off with God giving me a very difficult answer to this question. So after what probably was just a glance through of the scriptures that were provided, I decided to go look for advice from various people. I asked this question at various Bible studies I go to. I looked for relevant sermons that may have answers to this question, and I reached out to folks that I knew. And this is when things started to go wrong, because the advice I got was all pretty superficial. They were saying things like, just pray more and have faith. God will speak when you're ready to listen. Or another one is, if things aren't working out, it might mean that it's not God's will, that I need to submit to him more. Or that I should remember that God's timing is perfect, that I shouldn't be rushing this, that I should focus on obedience, and he'll provide clarity eventually. Now, if we look at this advice at the surface level, this is all pretty solid advice. But if I start pulling at the loose threads that this advice leaves hanging, they all start to fall apart quite quickly. So in my last video, I shared the journey I took to learn how I can test if something I'm hearing is coming from God. I learned that this discernment often comes through the Holy Spirit's still small voice, and combined with reading scriptures and seeking counsel from others, looking for confirmations, praying, and a whole lot more. And I put this all in a framework that I now use quite often. Ultimately, though, it does require me to step out in faith and to act on what I believe God is saying. And for the small everyday things like, should I be sharing my testimony to this person, or supporting people's philanthropic work, or helping church activities, or giving to the poor, for smaller things like this, stepping out in faith is easy to do. Because even if I'm wrong, even if God actually didn't want me to go to speak to that person and the conversation bombs, I can easily brush it off, saying, you know what, I've laid the seed and maybe someone else will water it in the future. When things go wrong with these small little things, I don't need to confront the fundamental question of why, when I step out in faith, does it not work out? Doing these everyday things at the surface level doesn't require me to risk much. And here's the thing about that. If I don't risk anything, I'm not really using my faith. And if I'm not using my faith, I'm not growing in faith. So what if I need to step out in real faith and do big, risky things? The types of things that, if they don't work out, I'll immediately feel the consequences. So, for example, as I've shared previously, my background is in science and academia, and I have a large network, and I have a solid reputation with this network. That was until a few months back. I felt led to share my testimony to my network. These people are scientists and entrepreneurs and investors that may have invested in my previous companies, and they have no time for wacky Christian stuff. And by sharing with them, I actually risk a whole lot. I risk my whole career. And the response, well, it's exactly as expected. These people now consider me as crazy. And I've lost all the credibility that I've gained over time. I lost deals, I lost opportunities, and I'll probably never be able to raise money from these investors again, even though I actually desperately need to. This, unlike the small little things that I shared earlier, has real-world risk, and it's put everything I have in this world on the line. So my question is, was I actually following what God wanted me to do? Or another example, I heard of someone who suddenly got really ill and was on her deathbed in hospital. And I don't know her, but I felt a deep sense that I should go and pray for her healing, feeling prompted that if I do, that she would have a miraculous healing. And after seeking confirmation from the Bible, where I got clear scriptures talking about miraculous healing, I felt like this was a solid confirmation. So I go to the hospital she's at, and I fast and I pray, and with at least a mustard seed size of faith, I expected healing. And I stayed with them for 3 nights in the hospital praying. And so, I'm a random stranger. They don't know me. I'm probably getting in the way of them spending the last moments they have with their daughter. And then she dies. This, again, is not like the shallow things that I mentioned above. Here, I cannot simply brush this off. This is something where I clearly thought I heard from God. Clearly, I got confirmations. But when I stepped out in faith, it didn't work out. And so again, I asked, did I actually hear from God? You see, the superficial answers that I mentioned above just don't work here for things like this. Advice like, maybe it wasn't the right time, or maybe I just need to fast and pray more, or perhaps I did not have enough faith, and because of that, it's actually my fault this didn't work. You see, none of that superficial advice actually works here. Or does it? Maybe I am wrong. Perhaps it is true that getting to know God's will and hearing what He wants me to step out in faith to do just takes time. And that as I mature, things will get more clear. So, okay, this advice is actually something I can test. If this advice is correct, then in theory, I should therefore see the following. I should see mature Christians living lives that are far more aligned to God's will. I should see mature Christians taking far riskier steps of faith. And I should see their steps of faith land with much more success. I should see them doing crazy things like raising people from the dead or casting out demons. But is this what I see? Well, no. Instead, it seems like the more mature Christians become, the more subdued they are, the less risky things they try, even those with huge ministries that I've reached out to for advice. And here's the scary thing, because I feel myself slipping in that direction too. I feel myself not wanting to step out in faith as much, all the more as I look for examples of other people in the church. So here is the difficult question that I may not like the answer to. Do they actually have a point? Is it really the case that I should be lowering my expectations? That for some reason that the works that Jesus told us that we will do, the works much greater than these? that these are no longer something that we could do. I don't want this to be the answer. This would be depressing. It is, however, a point of view that many Christians actually have. Many believe that these works ended when the apostles died. But how can this be true? Because there are still at least a few miraculous examples that even I know of in the modern world. So this led me down a deeper study into the book of Acts and into the letters that Paul wrote. I looked at these books through the lens of trying to figure out that either is it true that for some reason God has stopped working through the church, or perhaps could it be that God did not change, but that somehow it's the church that has changed? And this is when I started to get even more difficult answers. I did a deep dive into comparing the early church and what individuals did in that early church, and compared it to today and what I do today. It turns out that if I look at this comparison, I'm lukewarm. And as far as I can tell, so is almost all of the modern church. So let me show you. So this is the comparison analysis that I created. And again, what I'll do is I'll share this as a link in the description of the video. But let me go through a few. Back then, the churches were pretty small. They had home-based churches of between 10, maybe 50 people. And here, because of their size, you personally knew everybody. You knew their problems, and therefore there was a deep community focus. In addition, these churches thought that Jesus' return was right around the corner. And this urgency actually made them really, really committed. It's not like the imminency doctrine that we see today, which is kind of this fluffy picture that, sure, Jesus could come back at any time, but it hasn't happened for 2,000 years, and therefore it could still take another 2,000 years, so let's just sit back and do the best as we can and get on with life. That's not what I read in Acts. These people thought Jesus was coming back tomorrow, or next week, or maybe next month. None of them assumed that this would take another 2,000 years. They didn't even assume this would take another 10 years. They literally thought Jesus may come back tomorrow. Early believers also lived risky, faith-driven lives every day. Many sold everything they had, and sure, they still worked just like Paul did, making tents. But work wasn't their occupation. Discipleship was their occupation. They had an expectation and faith that God would supernaturally provide for them. They mentored each other continually. In addition, they were totally committed to pursuing holiness. Not like the fluffy super grace approach I see today. And this wasn't a salvation issue for them, right? They knew salvation was a gift through grace, but their pursuit of holiness was all-encompassing. Back then, if you had sin in your life, you would know it, and so would everyone else. And if you did not fix it, there were consequences. So comparing to what I'm doing, it's obvious. I'm lukewarm. And so as human nature would have it, I immediately started to look for excuses. Luckily, the church has actually made it super easy for me to find good sounding excuses, and I'll actually list them out here. There's a different culture and perspective today. Back then they were persecuted, so they had to meet in homes and stick together. Another excuse is that early Christians had simple lives. Today we have jobs, bills, kids' sports programs, we have busy 9-to-5 jobs, things like that. Or another popular excuse was that Acts was written during the honeymoon phase of the church. Another one is early church had apostles who taught perfectly. Another one seems to suggest that today we are just at a different growth phase. We have mega churches today, and back then it was just a different phase of growth. So I would recommend you actually go check those out. So after doing this research, I now needed to confront the question that, is the reason that things may not be working out for me due to me not being like the early church? Or should I consider the opposite? That perhaps I should take the opportunity to simply accept one of these excuses and, dial down my efforts, dial down my expectations, and live a more low-risk life. I must be honest, at this point, I was actually seriously considering this. And this is when God gave me an answer I was not really happy with. Now, before I share with you the answer God gave, I need to first quickly share why and how I became a Christian. I came to choose to become a Christian and to choose the light because of a vision I had. It wasn't because I attended a church service or anything I heard that someone said. It wasn't because of some sermon or some evangelist. I chose to become a Christian because of a choice that was presented to me. A black and white choice that was spoken to me in a language that I could understand. And so I really hope I'm explaining this sufficiently, because God was leading me back to this choice as he was answering this question. As I explained at the beginning of this video, actually one of the first scriptures that I was led to right at the start of this journey was the book of Jeremiah. And if I had just really meditated on it, I would have had my answer. You see, in the book of Jeremiah, here is someone who made a choice really early on in life. And for the next 40 years of that life, he never saw any success. 40 years of his ministry failed. It failed to cause Israel to repent. His steps out in faith almost always resulted in failure. That obviously wasn't the case. The lesson God was showing me is that I didn't choose him so that I could have success in these faith jumps I was making. He reminded me that I chose the light because I wanted the light. No matter what happens, even if I step out onto the water and I drown, or even if I act on something and it doesn't work out, it is better for me to step out and make that daily choice than to go back to the darkness. And it was here that I learned that the definition of faith that I was using was disconnected to the faith that brought me to Christ in the first place. The definition that I was using now was defined as trust and confidence and conviction. And this you can think of as like a dial, where some days it could be higher and some days it could be lower. But if I use this definition, I could always fall into thinking that perhaps I just don't have enough faith. This type of faith doesn't reflect the choice I made. Mine was a binary choice. It was a black and white choice. If I go out and buy a car, for example, and I pick a white car as opposed to a black car, in days even when I'm struggling with, trust and confidence and conviction, my car doesn't suddenly turn black. No, obviously it stays white because the choice was made. Period. This is the definition of faith that brought me to Christ. And if I read what is written about faith, this is why faith as small as a mustard seed is sufficient to move mountains. Because it's not about the amount of faith that I have, but rather that I have any faith at all that matters. My faith is like a binary switch. Either it's on or it's off. There's no middle ground. No matter how big or small my faith is, if I have faith, then it is 100% on. This definition of faith reminds me of the story of the centurion that went to Jesus and asked to heal his servant. Jesus said that in him he saw more faith than in all of Israel. This centurion came from a military background, where he followed orders not because he trusted or had confidence or conviction that the person who gave the orders knew what they were doing. No, he followed orders because if he didn't, he would be dead. And it seems like that same conviction was what his faith was built on. He knew that Jesus had the authority, and therefore it had little to do with the amount of faith he had. It just mattered that he had faith. And so God is answering the question by asking me, what is my faith based on? So yeah, this answer isn't really what I wanted, and this whole journey took me through some pretty difficult lessons, but it taught me some hard truths I definitely needed. So, am I lukewarm? Do I need to revisit the expectations I have? Should I still take leaps of faith? Yes, to all of these. I chose God, I chose the light, and that faith is all I need. So, peace to all of you. Bye-bye.